What if your instrument approach chart only showed you exactly what you needed right when you needed it? Today, we're talking with Cole Crawford from ForeFlight about their new dynamic procedures feature that puts interactive, context-aware approach data right on the moving map. They say it's a smarter, safer way to brief and fly IFR procedures, and it might just change how you fly. Now, I'm excited about this new feature because, in my opinion, it enhances safety for pilots flying IFR. A common error I see IFR pilots make is that they pick the wrong altitude minimums from their charts. And as I mentioned in a recent episode, it appears to me that the pilot of Citation that crashed in San Diego made just that mistake because he flew all of the approach altitudes correctly except for the final MDA. So in my opinion, ForeFlight's dynamic procedures will greatly reduce the odds of reading the wrong minimums on a chart. And by the way, we have a special video version of this episode today for everyone to see, and I'll tell you about it in a few minutes. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 391, we talked with Tom Turner of the American Bonanza Society and with a student pilot who's considering 3 options for learning to fly, including buying a Bonanza and learning to fly in it. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/391. And if you're new to this show, take a moment right now and touch either the subscribe key or, if you're using Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, the follow key so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And you may want to check out episode 5 of NTSB News Talk, which just came out. And in it, Rob, Mark, and I talk about a number of recent accidents and NTSB reports. One was the recent tragic crash of a Cirrus SR-22 in North Carolina that killed a family of 4 after the aircraft experienced an electrical problem. And we talk about the bizarre case of a Cessna T-240 that departed Ramona, California this past Sunday and was cleared to land at Montgomery Field, but ended up flying 400 miles offshore. And you can find that show, NTSB News Talk, in your favorite podcast app and at ntsbnewstalk.com. And earlier today, Lightspeed announced their new Zulu 4 headset. It's priced at $10.99, and it fits in their product line between the Zulu 3, which sells for $9.49, and their top-of-the-line Delta Zulu that sells for $12.99. It can connect via Bluetooth to both your iPad and your phone simultaneously, and they use AI to reduce the background noise on the audio that you send out via Bluetooth by up to 90%. It also has a longer mic boom so you can place it right in front of your lips, and its new ear seals provide a better fit around sunglasses and baseball hats. If you want to read more about this headset, go first to our special link at aviationnewstalk.com/lightspeed. That will take you to their website, and if you decide to buy any Lightspeed headset, they will send a check to support Aviation News Talk, but only if you first go to aviationnewstalk.com/lightspeed. And my thanks to these people who've signed up in the past week to support Aviation News Talk. They include one-time donations from Michael Barham and Andrew Langen. And just so you know, here's the kind of content that you'll get when you sign up to support the show via Patreon. In episode 390, I talked on this show about my first flight in an electric airplane, so you got to hear all about that. And if you were a Patreon supporter at the $20 a month level or higher, you've already seen the 33-minute video I posted that showed that entire flight. And for now, that's the only way to see that video. Now, you can also support the show at lower and higher levels, but the $20 a month level is one of the most popular options, which means over the course of a year, you'll have spent perhaps about what you'd spend to go flying for an hour to support this show. And to give everyone a flavor for the quality of our videos and what it's like to be a Patreon supporter of the show, I'm giving every listener access to the video version of today's episode, which normally only Patreon supporters would see. And that way you can see our guest demonstrate how ForeFlight's new dynamic procedures work. And then you'll be all ready to use that feature when it becomes available, which she tells me will be in the weeks following AirVenture. And of course, AirVenture is in Oshkosh next week. To see that video now, which is on my Patreon site, just go to a special link that I've set up for you, which is aviationnewstalk.com/ForeFlight. And at the top of that page, you'll see a button labeled Upgrade. Please click on that to sign up to support the show at whatever level you choose. Below that button, you'll see a list of recent posts, and currently the top post is called Bonus Video, ForeFlight's new dynamic procedures, interactive approach charts on the moving map. Now, if you're looking for that video weeks from now, you'll have to scroll down through the most recent post to get to the one about the video. And if you're listening in your car right now, go ahead and listen to this audio version and watch the video later. But if you're at home, you can stop the audio version now and watch the video at aviationnewstalk.com/ForeFlight. Now let me tell you a little about Cole Crawford. Cole is the group product manager of ForeFlight's general aviation market segment and has been with the company for 5.5 years. He's also an instrument-rated commercial, multi, and single-engine pilot. He enjoys flying his 1980 Piper Dakota from Texas to the Southeast. And now here's our conversation with Cole Crawford. Cole, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
I'm really excited to be here, Max. I'm a big fan myself. I've been listening for a few years now after some folks in our office recommended your show.
That's great. And you and I have talked before, but we've never had you on the show, so welcome to the show. I know that you've got something new to talk about. Tell me about what was the issue or the problem that you were trying to solve at ForeFlight when you created dynamic procedures. In other words, why would listeners care about what you're about to tell us about?
Sure. Yeah. So we embarked down this journey many years ago, and the overarching problem was that we wanted to make it easier for you to have approach-related information on the map and in our product dynamically, meaning the map is the very center of most people's experience in ForeFlight Mobile, and they're used to interacting with various elements like, they're familiar with tapping on a waypoint or tapping on an airport and being able to pull up information and see everything in context to everything else that they're doing. And we felt that procedures was an element of the product that we had that didn't have the same richness to it that everything else did. And we noticed that people were very often switching to the plates tab and doing things there and then coming back. And you sort of get taken out of the dynamic experience of the map in ForeFlight. And so our objective was, how do we bring people into the map and that they can use and interact with approaches and other terminal procedures all in context in the map, so they still have access to traffic and weather and all the various things that they're used to. And I think we took it from the philosophy of, if you woke up today and said, wouldn't it be great if we could fly in the clouds? And then you said, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a way to find a runway while you were in the clouds? And you came up with procedures. And then you had the question of, well, how are we going to tell people about how to fly this procedure? I don't think in the modern era that you would come up what's effectively a PDS, right? And so we tried as much as we could to think about how we would want to consume that information in a digital product today. And that's really what we've been working on over the last 3 years.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because I think if we were to start IFR and general aviation flying from scratch today, we would not be using the same paper charts that were originated 80, plus 90 years ago, because those were the only tools that they had. So I think that's really great to kind of envision how should this look as opposed to, hey, let's just continue on with the tools that we have because that's the only thing that was available back in the old days.
Right, exactly, right. There's all kinds of things in the aviation ecosystem that made sense then, given the constraints that they were under at the time, that don't necessarily make sense now. And so we try to often rethink some of those things and ask ourselves, like, is this really what we would do, or is this just an artifact of the way we were brought up?
Indeed. So let's just talk about safety for a moment. Tell me how you think dynamic procedures could impact the safety of GA pilots when they're flying.
I think the biggest thing is everything being in context for pilots. So just like I had talked about earlier about switching back and forth and having to context switch their brain on like what's happening on the map, where is traffic, what's happening with weather, what's happening with everything else around them. Like when you're flying a procedure, the world still exists and time is still continuing, right? Like you're participating in a larger picture of the national airspace system. And so I think there's a lot to be said by just having that context. And the additional elements that I think are really important is when you look at a procedure plate today, very often, and going back to like the fact that a lot of the things that are there are artifacts of the constraints they had at the time, when you look at procedure play today, there are actually multiple procedures typically being depicted on the same chart. So for example, in ILS or LOC, those are actually two different procedures, but they are displayed on the same piece of paper. Or for example, you might have different types of minimums that are all displayed on the same piece of paper. And so as a result, there's a lot more information there than it is necessary for you to have at the time you're flying it. And that requires your eyes to kind of move all around the chart. You not only brief it, but when you need something, you're kind of scanning for different things. And you might miss something if you aren't very meticulous with the way that you brief and approach. And I think the way that we are introducing this all in context on the map makes it much easier for you to find the very important pieces of information and show you the things that are relevant to the procedure that you're flying, and not just the artifacts of what they had to try to fit all in on one piece of paper.
Yeah, I agree. To me, that's one of the huge benefits as I look at what you have. And that is that, for example, when you look at minimums, there might be a dozen numbers down at the bottom of the chart, only one of which applies. And worse than that, there's another dozen numbers in parentheses. So it's really easy, I think, for pilots to look down and grab the wrong number when they look at the chart. And it sounds like this is something that would reduce the odds of that happening.
Yeah, or the really insidious one that you have probably run across in your flying days is you'll look at a procedure and there'll be a little note that says, if such condition is true, then add 100 feet or whatever, right? And then, so then you have to handle all the table at the bottom, but then also remember to add that in. And our dynamic procedures experience just handles all of that for you.
That's great. All right, well, let's get to it. And for those who are watching video, they'll be able to see what you're sharing with us. For our audio audience, if you would, please act like a radio announcer and describe play-by-play.
Okay, we're looking at the map here on ForeFlight Mobile, and most everyone will be familiar with this experience. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my home airport just as a starting point, which is Austin International. So we're going to tap that. We're going to add Austin to the route. And just for fun, I'm going to start the flight. We'll do insert before, and I'm going to pick an airport just so make it a little more realistic. So today we're flying from Llano, Texas to Austin, Texas. For those listening, if you get the opportunity, Llano has a great fly-in barbecue restaurant that you may want to visit.
Okay, so it looks like we're going from KAQD to KAUS.
Yes, KAQO.
Okay.
Kilo Alpha Quebec Oscar to Kilo Alpha Uniform Sierra. And then you'll be familiar in the flight plan drawer for ForeFlight on the very top on the map. You'll see different elements on the right side. One of them is called procedure, and this is all existing stuff today. This is not new, but you'll kind of see where we're going from here. When you tap procedure, you're given a list of possible procedures you could choose from. So we're going to choose approach, and we're going to choose the ILS 18 left. And again, this is all existing functionality. I'm only choosing 18 left because they tend to give G8 pilots the east runway at Austin. And here you can see your transition that we're asking you to choose between. So we're going to choose Hookham in this case, and then we're going to choose the ILS. So here you can see this is, again, all existing capability that's been in ForeFlight for several years now, where you can select your minima. You can change your aircraft category. So maybe I'm flying a Baron today, and so I'm going to change to category B. And we're showing you the different minima and doing all that table lookup math for you, so you don't have to go and figure out all that. The only thing that is new on the screen that you're seeing right now is the MSA circling ring. So you can notice that here, that we depict the ring and the different quadrants and the altitude, the minimum safe altitudes for each quadrant on the map. But otherwise, everything else up to this point is existing functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and do is add to route. And what you can see is our new dynamic procedures sidebar just automatically loaded on the map. So you can see that you can hide and close it with a tap of this little sidebar button if you want to. From here in the very top, you'll be able to very quickly identify which procedure is on the sidebar. So in this case, you see ILS runway 18 left at Austin, which is the one I just selected. And you can quickly hide the chart by tapping hide chart, and you can press show chart to load the chart as well. Note that this capability works with both FAA issued charts and Jeppesen charts. And in a minute, I'm going to switch versions of ForeFlight so that you can see both. So we have a little bit of both in the recording. You can also very quickly at the very top, change the approach. And by tapping change approach, it gives you the ability to change the approach selected, the transition selected, or the minimum. So if you need to change any of those things, you can do that very quickly. I'm not going to do that just yet, but just to show you how that works. Then you'll notice at the very top, you can see the NavAid primary frequency identifier, the final approach course, and the touchdown zone elevation at the very top. Then you move top to bottom, just like you would on a chart. You can see all the different frequencies that apply to this approach. So you see D8 at Austin, the approach frequencies, you can see the tower frequencies. In the case of Austin, we have a lot of frequencies, so there's a lot to look through here. You can see the different sectors that they come from as well.
And it looks like you're swiping there to get to additional frequency screens.
Yes.
Got it. Okay,
yes. So there's
and right
pages that you can swipe left and right through to view the different frequencies. Then below that, you have the notes that apply to the procedure and minima that you selected. So you can see we have DME required here. I'm not going to read through the rest of them, but these are all notes that you would be familiar with. Then below that is where things get really interesting as you're flying along. Because typically people, they brief the notes and then you kind of move on and you're looking more at the altitude constraints. And from here on, you can see every leg of this approach procedure shown in the route section and is color coded just like you're familiar with on ForeFlight's map today. So as you fly along, the colors on the sidebar will also change to reflect the active segment, the segments you've already flown, and the segments in front of you. You can see also the altitude constraints for each fix. So you can see you have to cross hook them at 5,000. You can see the distance of each leg, the course to be flown, and the altitude and speed restrictions. Where it gets very interesting, though, is at the bottom, you will notice that the minima that you selected earlier is highlighted in very bright magenta. It's very hard to miss it. And you can see the decision altitude and the decision height of what you selected, as well as in this case, an RDR minima that applies. So one of my favorite things, and I think will help safety to some degree, is every time you look at an approach chart, on the side, you always see that, Malisar or whatever approach lighting code. And then, of course, the FAA, they imagine that all of us remember encoded in our brain is exactly what the lights look like for every one of those given codes. But what we decided to do is, why don't we just show you what they look like? So you'll notice here is ForeFlight's 3D view depiction of the approach lights at that runway. You can view it. There's a segmented controller that shows you the approach light view, or you can look at what it looks like on short final. So you can see actually what it's going to look like. And you can tap this little full screen button there, and that brings up the view, ForeFlight's famous 3D view of the approach in 3D. You can toggle it between day and night mode. And this is an existing feature, but one of the little known things about this is that the lights also respect the camera angle. So you can see the animation of the rabbit there. But if you watch the PAPI on the left side of the runway, as I pan up, you notice that it turns white, and then you pan down, it turns red. So it actually gives you a realistic expectation of what you should expect the approach lights to look like when you come down the very end of the approach and you pop out of the clouds, so that you can make sure you identify the correct runway.
I've got a question for you on the 3D visualizations. Now, prior to this particular release of ForeFlight, if you wanted to see 3D in flight, you had to get that way. You had an internet connection, presumably when you're on the ground. Is that still the case here, or will this have pre-stored some of these 3D visualizations for you? So, for example, if we got diverted to another airport and didn't pack data for that airport, would we still have that?
So yes, you hit the key word there, is that you need to be packing before flight. So ForeFlight, if you pack for your flight, will download all of this information, cache it locally on your iPad so it can render it. In particular, this particular view can render some of the elements even if you haven't packed it. So we try our best to give you as much of it as we can, even if you don't pack it. But the sort of rule of thumb is that you should always pack before your flight so that you have all this kind of information stored on your iPad before you take off.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Then just below this, in the last section, you'll see on the sidebar is the missed approach textual description. So you'll see, in this case, what the published missed approach instructions are, and you can see that there. This is the main element of the sidebar. I'm going to switch to a different version of ForeFlight so I can show you Jeppesen charts as well while I show you one of the other new elements. So very similar, I'm going to add Austin to the route. We're going to select the approach. We're going to do the same approach. We're going to do hook them. You can see the Jeppesen chart now this time loaded beneath the graphical depiction as well. We'll do the ILS, and we're going to do category B minimums and add to route. So just like I said earlier, you can use Jeppesen charts or government charts with this capability, and both will be overlaid on the map. And it's just as easy to tap hide chart. We'll show it back again. Okay, one of the other new elements of this is, and I'm actually going to insert for route. We'll make sure we have Lano Airport on the map as well. We are going to look at profile. So you tap profile view. The other big new element is ForeFlight's profile view that people are very familiar with now has a new mode called approach mode. And I'll toggle approach mode and the normal route mode kind of back and forth for you so you can see, and we need to actually select a route here. Okay, so when you toggle from the regular route mode to approach mode, you'll notice first that bottom bar, I'll show you kind of right here, goes away, as well as some other elements go away. So it's designed to declutter that view. It turns off the airspace, it turns off the weather layers that are in the profile view, and shows you a very simplified view only of the last element of your route, which is the approach procedure. And in this case, what I think is really interesting about this is inside the profile view, you can see the step down fixes drawn prior to the final approach fix at D2. And you can see the glide slope as well. So you can see what that difference in altitude really is if you captured it high and flew down, or if you descended along all the step downs. Yeah, so here we have our side view, and in this our profile view. And in the profile view, you'll be able to see the threshold crossing height and the glide path angle of the glide slope. You can also see the decision altitude that you had selected earlier from your minima in magenta, so it's very bright and hard to miss at the very end of the approach. You can see the touchdown zone elevation, and then you can see all of the fixes shown to scale in profile. And it gives you the ability to see both the opportunity to fly the step downs before you reach the glide slope intercept, or you can also see the glide slope as a dashed line depicted further out. So you can see what that would look like if you intercepted it well before the normal published glide slope intercept point.
That's great.
So you can kind of see whatever you'd like to do.
And I'm curious, will we see the airplane flying along on that profile side view of the approach?
You absolutely will. So it's not as interesting because I'm sitting on the ground right now. But if you look very carefully in the particular screenshot, I'm actually sitting underneath this approach physically right now. And so it's very hard to tell because it's not flying and it's kind of on the ground. But there is a little tiny airplane down there at about 8.5 miles down path. In any case, the other thing that's really interesting about this that a keen eye will notice is that on the very top, there is a scale that is drawn. So you can see a 5 mile, a 10 mile, 15 nautical mile. And that is distance down path from the end of the approach. So what that means is that you can see effectively flying miles remaining on this approach, which I have found to be very useful many times if you're going into an uncontrolled field and you've got some, there's a deck, but there's still people in the pattern based on the altitude, and you're trying to tell them how many miles you have left. It gives you a better sense of how many flying miles you have remaining, which I find to be quite useful on here.
Yes, I agree. That's huge. In fact, I'm often telling people to use the nearest key on whatever glass cockpit we're using just so they can come up with that kind of mileage. So great that that's now built into this. And I can see that the profile view with this new version is really cleaned up. It's a little bit larger with just the bare bones necessary information there. I'm curious, can you zoom in as well, or is that kind of a fixed width on that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, super. So we can zoom in as much as we want and examine in closer detail part of that side view of the approach.
Absolutely. And you'll notice that that glide slope will actually paint all the way up to the altitude you had selected previously. So you can approximate where down your route you would be reaching top of descent if you wanted to come all the way down top of descent. Most people don't do that, but it is available there if you want to do that as well.
Okay.
Excellent question. So why don't I show you a couple other types of procedures as well, just to make it interesting. So what we will do is we will close this down. I'm going to reverse the route. So now we're going to be going from Austin back to Atlanta. I'm going to hide this chart. And we will look at an approach procedure. We will look at the RNAV 17, into Rano, beginning at a keiki, because that's what I feel like doing. And then we're going to do the LNAV procedure into this airport, so a non-precision approach. And you can see here, in this particular case, you can see where we're going to intercept a keiki, that we're going to fly a course reversal. So this is kind of a good example of that. So you can see on this particular procedure, there is a maximum and a minimum altitude when you cross a keiki. You can see both of those there. You can see the course reversal painted, and you cross a keiki again, at or above 3,300. You can see the Maltese cross when you cross the final approach fix, and then you can see everything else there. I'm going to open the profile as well. So it's a better way to see the sort of step downs here, because in this case, there is not a glide slope. So there only are step downs, and you can see where the minimum descent altitude is shown. And you can see how you would still have to find your own way down from the minimum descent altitude to the runway.
And I can see we're set up nicely with the profile view on the top, the Jeppesen chart in the lower left, and the new sidebar on the lower right. I'm curious, for each of the different legs of the approach, you did mention that those will change color as you progress along the approach. Does that also show the airplane along that little line or not?
No, it doesn't. The little airplane icon doesn't show up in the sidebar, but it definitely shows up on the map. So you can very quickly scan between what's happening on the right and what's happening on the map. Especially, it's harder to demonstrate this, but especially when you're in flight and you have the auto center mode turned on. So if you're familiar with that, in the very top right corner of the map in ForeFlight is that auto center mode. The airplane is always going to be on the center point of the line there, and so you can follow along with what's happening quite easily.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
You can see the MSA ring painted on this case as well.
Go ahead and highlight that with your pointer, if you would, the MSA ring.
Yeah, so in this case, this particular approach has a very vanilla MSA ring. It's just 25 miles of runway 17 is 3,700 feet. Some of the other approaches you'll find have lots of quadrants where the altitude changes depending on which quadrant we're in.
Got it. So this looks like a red circle, maybe orange.
It's an orange sort of color that you can see as well.
Okay.
So we'll look at one other interesting approach that's near me. So I'm going to open this tab here again, and we're going to reverse the route. I'm going to remove Austin, and we're going to go to Tango 74, which is Taylor, Texas, also known for its barbecue. They don't want to leave it out, and keep it short. In any case, we're going to tap Procedure Advisor again. We'll tap Approach. And this time we're going to do the VOR 17. So SDEF. And so this is actually a great example of this. So this is a type of a procedure where the minima changes based on which altimeter setting you use. So you can see that here in the minima selection, where the minimum is 1180, unless you're using the Austin Executive altimeter, in which case it's 1220. We're going to select, we're just not going to use the Austin Executive, so we're going to do out to route. And now you can see here another course reversal. Everything else that I've already shown you is effectively the same, though in this case, you can see that the first time you cross SDEF, you have to cross it at or above 2,500. And then after you cross, you can descend to 2,200. And so you'll notice on the sidebar, you see SDEF just shown twice because there's effectively two legs. But on the map, you'll notice that there is a little arrow that points to which minima currently applies. And so that arrow, once you cross SDEF the first time, see it right there. There's a little magenta arrow. Once you cross SDEF the first time, then the arrow will move down and show you that the next active minima is 2,200 rather than 2,500. But the main reason I picked this approach and what I wanted to show was the approach light view. So the thing that's interesting about this particular approach for the astute reader or listener of this particular one is that it is an offset approach. So it's technically a VOR runway 17, but it's pretty offset from the actual angle of the runway. And so our approach light visualization is set to that angle as well, which means that this is really what the lights are going to look like to you when you come down the end of this approach. And it's kind of, cattywampus on you, right? For anyone that's flown that kind of an approach where you're not really looking right at the runway, that can be disorienting the first time you see it. So this gives you a much stronger situational awareness when you come out of the clouds and you're looking for that runway.
Speaking of looking for runways, there certainly have been a lot of challenges and some accidents where people were landing at very dark airports at night. Do you think the 3D view has any advantage for people who are flying VFR at night into a poorly lit airport for trying to visualize exactly what they're looking for?
I certainly do. I mean, that's one of the things that I look for or that I brief when I go to a brand new airport, really day or night. I will go to the airports tab with ForeFlight, look at the 3D view, and kind of just familiarize myself with what I am expecting it to look like. And just having that visual familiarity, especially at night, helps a lot because it sort of gives your brain an expectation of what you think you should see when you get there. So I personally use that a fair bit for night flying.
Okay. What else do you have there for us?
The only other, I'm trying to think what else would be cool to show here. So what we can do is we can also show let's think here. We'll show this and we'll show a circling approach. So I don't normally advocate for circling, but I will show this anyway. I personally try to avoid circling approaches, but I just added a circling approach at Taylor. This is an RNAV approach, and you will notice that we also depict the circling area on the map graphically. And one of the things when we started building this, you know intuitively that it's a small area from just your instrument training, but once you really see how small it is, it's a different pill to swallow, I think, to some degree. So in any case, we are actually drawing the circling area on the map for you for circling approaches. So you can see for the circling minima that you selected, actually in real scale, how large that area is on the map for you. So that's another thing I think will help folks. Like I said, I personally don't like to do a lot of circling if I can avoid it, but it does make it a little bit easier to figure out in your head, am I really 1.3 nautical miles away, or exactly how does this really work? So it gives you a real sense of how big that protected area is for you.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. And let me go ahead and add something to your feature list for future things to add to this. One of the things that I've noticed about a number of circling accidents is that aircraft have flying a downwind which is too close to the runway. And that occurs because visually, if you're at, say, half the normal traffic pattern altitude, visually everything's going to look right when you're half as close again to the runway. So instead of flying a downwind that's a mile offset from the runway, you end up flying one that's half a mile offset, and then you overshoot the base to final turn. I would love to see a depiction of maybe the 1 mile offset for that downwind, which would help people kind of figure out, okay, where do I need to be in this circle so I'm at roughly the right distance so that I don't overshoot the base to final turn.
That's an excellent idea. I do like that a lot. Yeah, I remember the very first time that when I was doing my instrument training 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, and the first time I did a circling approach at circling minimums with my CF double I, and man, that's an eye opener for you. That it's definitely a little squirrely there for you.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest thing we do in instrument flying. So yeah, any tool that we can use to make it a little bit safer is a good one.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the main meat of what I wanted to show you today, but I want to make sure to leave time for questions that you have or other things you want to talk about.
Yeah, first of all, what subscription level do people need to be at to have the dynamic procedures?
That's an excellent question. So we are actually going to be giving a limited time preview to all of our subscribers on launch day. So regardless, as long as you're a paying subscriber, you'll have access to a limited preview for the regions that we support. So on launch day, we are supporting the US and Canada. We'll be adding more regions in the future as well. But for all of our paying subscribers, you'll have access to the capability included in your subscription for a limited time. And then after the limited preview period is over, it'll be for our essential and above subscribers.
Okay.
For the regions that they have subscribed to.
Understood. And if you would give us a little inside baseball, talk a little bit about the sausage making of instrument chart creation and how that relates to the new features that you have here in dynamic procedures.
Yeah, so actually making a chart exist is non-trivial, it turns out. So generally speaking, there are all of these air navigation service providers, right? So you can think of the FAA and CAA, and all the various countries have these organizations that are responsible for this. And they are also responsible for creating approach procedures for their area. And all of these providers basically publish the procedure information. And for really outside of the US, there's a sort of standardized way of doing that. And in the US, they have their own sort of standardized way. And generally what happens is cartographers, map makers effectively take that source information and turn it into what we call a pre-composed chart. So someone is actually coming up with a depiction or a permanent composed depiction of that data that was provided by the air navigation service provider. And that's what you see as charts, right? So Jeppesen is saying for doing that, they go and take that data from all of these air navigation service providers, and they produce a consistent pre-composed diagram of those procedures that looks the same regardless of which country you're flying in. And that's one of the big value propositions, is that their sort of way of depicting it and the styles and the fonts and the formats and all of those things is consistent across all the air navigation service providers. Whereas if you fly with FAA charts, those obviously stop working once you cross the border. So that's one of the large propositions there. And effectively, the way we built a lot of this is that we take that same source data that the people that are creating charts with, and we are taking that data and then rendering it dynamically in our app when you request to view a procedure effectively.
Got it. So you're pretty much creating charts on the fly for the sidebar and the profile view and things like that.
Yes, exactly. So it gives us the ability to allow you to interact with it. It gives us the ability to sort of display them to you in a very dynamic way. So like, for example, I can spin the map around, right? If you change directions, the plate is going to turn upside down on you, right? Because if you keep it geo-referenced, but we can keep all the fixed labels to not do that, right? So we can, at our runtime, render everything dynamically to make it readable. We can declutter things. We basically just have a lot more flexibility because we're not pre-composing it, right? We're writing code that makes it work very well in a lot of different scenarios, because you can just tell us what the scenario that you're flying is.
Well, I know you're a GA pilot. You've done a lot of beta testing of this, a lot of flying around. Any particular tips that you can pass along to people as to how to use it, or particular features that you really love?
Yeah. So one thing I would recommend is, my experience with learning how to use it is very similar to my experience from transitioning from like a low IFR chart or a VFR chart to ForeFlight's aeronautical map. And so one of the things that I think becomes important with a product like this is your law of primacy, that if you've ever instructed before, you're familiar with, right? Which is that whatever you learned first effectively sticks with you a lot. And so everyone that will see this in a few weeks, they will have already learned with either a government chart or a Jeppesen chart, or possibly both. And so there is a learning curve to switching from the pre-composed chart to something that is dynamic. And that is one of the main is one of the driving factors of the intentional decision we made to allow you to view both at the same time. We're intentionally not being very opinionated about whether you can view one or the other or both. We really want you to have access to both of them at the same time if you want, or we make it very easy to press hide chart and you don't see it anymore if you don't want to, right? We're leaving that choice up to the pilot. And a large reason of that is pilots aren't going to wake up and just overnight get rid of their charts, right? And that's not necessarily what we're trying to do either. So I sort of liken it to my two different experiences that are very similar. The first would be when I decided to start flying with Jeppesen charts full time. I had originally learned with FAA charts, and I didn't just, delete my government charts and download Jeppesen charts and, take off into the clouds and hope for the best. What actually happened was I had both on my iPad. I briefed my approaches with government charts, and then would look at the Jeppesen chart and then kind of realize, okay, this is where they put that. This is how this works. And then a day came where I was like, I'm going to brief it with a Jeppesen chart and then just look at the government chart to check my work and to make sure I had done it right. And eventually a day came where I didn't need to do that. And I just was flying with Jeppesen charts, and I had been doing that since. And similarly, when people switched from using the VFR chart or the IFR low chart to using ForeFlight's aeronautical layer, which has most all the same information, we didn't come out and say, thou shalt must switch to our aeronautical layer. And we make it very easy for you to have both of them on. But then what we've noticed is that over time, customers turn off the IFR load chart, or they turn off the VFR chart, and they just kind of naturally transition to the dynamic way of viewing that same information. But it just takes time for that to happen. And having access to both of them will allows them to do that at their own pace. And so that would be something that I encourage most people to do is you don't need to go and jump in on day zero and, burn everything you've learned to the ground, right? That's not what we're asking you to do or what we think you should do. Just give it a try, look at it, at the same time as you're briefing your charts, bring it into your flow naturally. And then over time, that sort of workflow and will sort of build, and you'll realize that you actually do have a lot more sort of situational awareness when you can have everything on the map and you can just quickly open the sidebar to view your minima or to view that note or to view one thing. It's very easy to find things, and your eye doesn't have to scan all around the chart like you normally do now because it's just painted right there.
Excellent. So where do people go to find any resources that you may have on the internet to help people to learn how to use this? And where do people go in general to find out information about ForeFlight?
So in general, we create a very exhaustive set of documentation around how to use and fly with ForeFlight, and it's called the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. It's very exhaustive. I would recommend using the search bar in it and those kinds of PDF tools. It's also available in app. This is a little known thing that few people know about, but you can tap more and tap support. And in here, you'll have access to our video guide. You can search our support center. You can read the Pilot's Guide directly by just tapping read the Pilot's Guide. I don't actually have it downloaded on this particular instance of ForeFlight, but it'll download it for you quite quickly. We're also going to be doing several webinars and producing different video content about it. So there'll be lots of opportunities to read and learn about it online as well.
And for people not using ForeFlight, they would go to...
If you're unfamiliar with ForeFlight, you can go to our website, which is ForeFlight.com. And on there, you'll find our support pages and videos and all that kind of thing as well to get familiar.
Cole, this looks like a really fantastic contribution. Congratulations on all the great work that ForeFlight's done over the years. And thanks so much for sharing this with our listeners today.
Yes, I'm glad to be here and hope everyone likes it.
And my thanks to Cole for joining us here today. You can find more about ForeFlight at ForeFlight.com. And just a reminder that I love hearing from you, and I read many of your emails on the show. If you'd like to send me a message, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. That's absolutely the best way to send me a message. And of course, I also want to thank everyone who supports the show in one of the following ways. We love it when you join the club and sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/support to support the show financially. You can also do that at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. We also love it when you leave a 5-star review on whatever app that you're listening to us on now. And of course, if you're in the market for a headset, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset and using one of the links in our show notes, because if you use those links, they will donate to help support the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.